Hello, my name is Chrissy Champagne, and you are listening to Residue, a true crime podcast dedicated to keeping you paranoid. Do you believe in haunted houses? I sure do. And just as an example, I usually have an attic podcasting room upstairs, and I was about to record up there today, but for some reason I decided that I would listen to the podcast I Survived, and the title of the podcast I listened to was called Ninja in My Attic. And so I'm up there trying to record this episode, and I just keep feeling like there's a ninja in my attic or a presence. So I'm downstairs, and you might hear my dog a little bit in this one. But anyway, back to the first question. Yes, I do believe in haunted houses. But after doing a lot of research on this story, I am not so convinced that I believe in this particular haunted house. And you might know which one I'm talking about because it is the most famous one that pops into most people's minds when you say the words haunted house. We will be going back to the year 1974, and we will be stopping in at 112 Ocean Ave in Amityville, New York. Amityville is a quaint little village on the south shore of Long Island in New York. It's about an hour's drive into New York City. The name of the town was derived from the Latin word for friend. The village of Amityville was incorporated on March 3rd, 1894, and in the early 1900s, it was a popular tourist destination. It is said that Annie Oakley was a frequent visitor, also Will Rogers, and actually Al Capone also had a house in the community at one point. You might already be familiar with the fact that Amityville is the setting for the movie Amityville Horror. I mean, I shouldn't even have to say that. You get it. So how exactly did this little, quaint, adorable village become the center and the topic of one of Hollywood's most fantastic, most franchised films of all time? Well, it isn't the story that you think it is, because when you watch Amityville Horror, the film, it's about the Lutz family. But that didn't happen first. What happened first was a horrible, horrible tragedy inside of that home, and that was the DeFeo family. This will be my first ever 1 and 2 part episodes. So for the first episode this week, we're going to discuss the DeFeo family and the murders that occurred in 1974 in the 2.5-story, 6-bedroom Dutch Colonial home at 112 Ocean Ave. In part 2, we will discuss the Lutz family, who is the center of the story in the movies that you've seen involving Amityville Horror, or the book, The Amityville Horror by J. Anson, which I did use as a main source when we will be discussing the Lutz family. Beginning in 1979 all the way up until today, in 2024, there have been nonstop remakes, movies, documentaries, books about the Amityville Horror. I'm sitting here counting how many different pieces of film were made about this movie. There's Amityville Horror, Amityville 2, The Possession, Amityville 3D, Amityville 4, The Amityville Curse, Amityville It's About Time, Amityville Dollhouse, and oh my god, yes, Amityville Vibrator. I looked that one up, and you just look it up for yourself. So with all of this, with this entire franchise, with all of these movies, and let's just enter into the conversation right here. Do not ever pass on the Amityville Horror starring Ryan Reynolds, because that's another one I'm going to need you to go watch for yourself and thank me later. That is one of the best ones, and Ryan Reynolds just kills it. So why did I not know that Ronald DeFeo Jr. had such a weird, just insane story that still, I think, to this day, we'll never know. We won't really ever know what happened inside of that home on 112 Ocean Ave. And nothing has ever really come close enough to explaining it. I'm a little amazed that I knew so little about the background of the DeFeo family. The real Amityville horror began on November 13th, 1974. It was a little after 6:30 p.m., and Ronald DeFeo Jr. came busting into a little dive bar called Henry's Bar in Amityville, New York. And he just yelled to everyone inside, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." This was a bar that he frequented a lot, so everyone knew who Ron was. And just as we go along in this story, he had a nickname. He was also called Butch. So his name was Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. So we'll call him Butch, and we'll call his father, Ronald Sr., Ron. He busts into the bar and he gets a bunch of people, a small group of his friends, all are like, "What are you talking about? What is going on?" So they all run out of the bar. This bar is only about a block away from Butch. This bar is only a block away from Butch's house. So the friends all get in their cars, get up to the house. One of his friends goes inside and discovers Butch's mom and dad dead in their bedrooms. And his father was Ronald DeFeo Sr. and his mother was Louise DeFeo. Her maiden name was Louise Briganti. So they're both found dead in their beds by Butch's friends. They then discover that there are 4 other people dead inside of that house. Butch had 4 siblings. So the other people that were found dead inside of the house were his siblings Dawn, who was 18, his sister Allison, who was 13, his brother Mark, who was 12, and his brother John Matthew, who was 9. 6 members of the DeFeo family lie dead in their beds, and every single one of them was lying face down in the bed. The parents, Ronald and Louise, were both shot twice in the head, and all 4 children were shot once. A .35 caliber Marlin 336C rifle was used in all 6 murders. And this type of rifle could be heard down the block. Even if you shot it inside of a house, somebody down the block would be able to hear these shots. There were 2 shots to each parent, and there were 4 shots for the kids. Not one neighbor heard anything, or not one neighbor wanted to report that they heard anything. And you might be asking yourself, why would there be the possibility that not one person in those homes would call the police if they heard that many gunshots? Now, this is just a theory. It's not my theory, but the DeFeos were connected with the mob. Ronald Jr.'s great uncle, Peter DeFeo, was part of the Genovese crime family. And Louise Briganti, Louise DeFeo, who used to be maiden name Louise Briganti, her father was Mike Briganti Sr., and he was known to be a, quote, big-time mobster. The DeFeo house in Amityville was actually purchased by Louise's father, Mike Briganti, for his daughter and his son-in-law, and this is when Louise found out she was pregnant, so her father actually bought 112 Ocean Ave for her to begin her family. Louise's father was so generous, and he also owned a car dealership named Briganti Carl Buick Dealership, and he let Ronnie Sr. work at the dealership, and also Ronald Butch Jr. worked at the dealership also. Now, some sources did say that the dealership might have been a front for some mafia stuff. I don't know. I don't want to talk about mafia stuff, so I don't know what they do. That's what some people said. So, Police are at 112 Ocean Ave, and of course, they're going to need to take Butch in for questioning right now, being he is the sole DeFeo survivor of this horrific night. And at this point, his grandfather, again, Michael Briganti, is going to front all charges for a lawyer for Butch. Now, Butch is being taken in for questioning, and everyone in town is hoping that they're going to find out soon what happened to the DeFeos, because by all accounts, the DeFeos were a loved family in town. People said that they were a wonderful family and very charitable. They did have a substantial amount of money, and there's even a news article from the day after this happened in 1974. I believe the article is from November 15th, 1974, and they do speak to some people in the neighborhood. Some of them describe even what the house looked like and how beautiful 112 Ocean Ave actually was. Now, to the outside world, the DeFeos were awesome. And in the news article, one of their neighbors recalls about their home. She said it was a beautiful home, very expensive. They had a big bar with champagne and everything. We would drink and play music, but I never met the whole family. So this is Butch's friend talking. She says, the whole family, they were always upstairs asleep. Sometimes Butch's mother would call downstairs for him to turn down the stereo, and they would get into a fight and they would yell at each other. They would yell at each other a lot, according to a lot of reports. Now, the family was known to have a lot of domestic violence inside of the home, and a lot of that most of it came from Ronald Sr. Ronald Sr. was a large, intimidating man who loved to brag about his ties with the mob all throughout town. He was very intimidating to his children, and he would yell at them a lot, punish them a lot. And it was also stated that Ronnie Jr. and his father, Ronald Sr., did not get along at all. Ronald Jr., Butch, was very spoiled. His parents even bought him a $14,000 speedboat, just because. So he's used to getting anything that he wants, but he was also used to being kind of tormented at home and at school. He was bullied a lot at school for his size. I guess Butch was a bigger guy, and a lot of the kids would make fun of him. So he's getting it from both angles now. He's getting yelled at home. He's getting yelled at in front of his friend when he brings her over. And this is one possible motivation that the police are coming up with. In that same news article that I just read from, Butch's friend also says about Butch that he would drink and then get into fights, but the next day he would apologize. He was angry. So we're seeing a pattern here of the anger from his parent or parents trickling down to him now, and it's affecting his social life. This New York Times article from 1974 stated that the neighbors said that they would prefer to remember the 6 other members of the DeFeo family as a close family, and the way they seemed to be so loving and so close. One of the neighbors recalls they would hold a prayer huddle on Sunday mornings. The neighbor stated that last year, so in 1973, the DeFeos installed a stable of St. Joseph holding the infant Jesus on their front lawn. And this statue had a fountain and spotlights, and Mr. DeFeo would also go to work and distribute statuettes of St. Joseph to all of his co-workers. And when he would give them these statues, he would say, "Nothing can happen to you as long as you wear this." When the police did take Butch in that night after the murders, they didn't take him in because they suspected him. They took him in because they were afraid that there could be some mafia ties to this murders, and they just wanted to keep him safe, because when they did arrive on the scene and they did start talking to Butch, he was the one that brought up the fact that this could definitely be related to the mafia since his family had ties. But we all know what I say about somebody that starts spouting off their own version of why something happened. It's usually never a good sign when a suspect, in quotes, starts telling the police, you know what I think happened? So Butch stays at the police station and he sleeps there. But while he's there, the police go back to the home and they start doing their investigation and interviewing his friends and looking for more evidence. And what do they discover when they talk to Butch's friends? They all tell the police that Butch had a love for guns. So the police start searching through Butch's bedroom, and guess what they find in his bedroom? They find a box of ammunition that is for the exact rifle that Butch's entire family was killed with. So now the police go back to the police station and they immediately arrest Butch. Butch is going to tell the police numerous stories as to what happened that night. So you really can't believe anything that he says. And the first story is that he believed it was a mob hit, and he actually gave the police a name when he told them that it was a mob hit. He gave them the name Louis Fellini. And Mr. Fellini had a rock-solid alibi. He was out of town. He wasn't even in the state at the time of the killings. What kind of person takes someone's name from the mob and tells a group of police officers that they just killed a bunch of people? That right there could be his insanity defense, in my opinion. Next up, he tells the police that this hitman was making him do it. So the hitman stood behind Butch, forced him with a gun to his head to commit murder on his parents and all 4 of his siblings. And then, the police were like, dude, that did not happen. And Butch was like, you're right, that did not happen. So the next thing he tells the police is that this is a quote from Butch. No, it all started so fast. Once I started, I couldn't stop. It went so fast. So Butch is now confessing to all 6 murders. It was his fault, he did it, and he couldn't stop. But why? There are so many different theories, because why didn't anybody hear the gunshots? Why were all 6 family members lying face down in the bed? Why didn't any of the family members try to run when they heard the first gunshot? If this is a gun where the sound can be heard a block away, you've got to imagine just logically that they all didn't just lay in their beds face down until he came in with the gun and shot each of them. I haven't heard anyone mention it yet in any of the research that I did, but it would be possible to me, and I'm just speculating here, that if somebody has a gun and they are murdering everyone in your house and you're just scared, young, they could tell you to just lay face down so that when he shot them in the back of the head, or they shot them, or she shot them, I don't know, they could have told them to lay face down so that they didn't have to see their face when they committed this murder, especially the younger kids. And that brings me to another theory. So I said they at one point. They did find another bullet in Louise, and it wasn't from the same gun. So that proves that there were 2 guns used in this murder. But how? Did 2 people commit it? Was it a group of people? Was it possible that Butch didn't act alone? Was it possible that Butch wasn't there at all and he was being set up? So we'll start to find out more at the trial. So now Butch's trial is about to begin. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr.'s trial began on October 14, 1975. He had a defense lawyer named William Weber, and this defense lawyer was paid for by Butch's grandfather, Michael Briganti. He ended up spending over $40,000 on Butch's defense team. But as this trial starts to go on, Michael Briganti starts getting upset with some of the things that Butch is saying. And he said, quote, that Butch was bringing the family name down, ruining the family name. And you know what? He was like, look, kid, you're on your own now. I've done as much as I can do. I'm out. The defense team is going to try to convince the jury that Butch was insane and that he had no memory of killing his family. So the insanity plea was actually supported by a psychiatrist that the defense hired. His name was Daniel Schwartz. And the psychiatrist for the prosecution, Dr. Harold Zoland, he maintained that even though Butch was a drug addict, even though he was a user of heroin and LSD, he had antisocial personality disorder, and he was aware of his actions at the time of this crime. As a side note, there is this fantastic podcast that I actually just realized existed, and to my surprise, it is hosted by none other than my favorite, Donnie Wahlberg of New Kids on the Block. This podcast is so good. They go so hard and so deep into this whole story about the DeFeos. They get interviews from so many people. You know, I'm just a girl doing this on my own. I don't have any help. I don't have CNN. I don't have access to these people that they spoke to. So I would definitely give this podcast a listen. It's called Very Scary People, Season 1, Small Town Murder, and extra bonus for Donnie Wahlberg being the voice of the show. Killer podcast voice. But they speak to a bunch of people that were actually inside of the courtroom when this trial was going on. The defense would use he didn't know what he was doing as their main legal defense. Like, this is how we're going to get him off. He didn't know what he was doing. They talk about, the jurors, they talk about how the psychiatrist Daniel Schwartz, so he's supposed to be on Butch's side. He's on the stand testifying that Butch is psychotic. He has no memory of what happened. And the whole time, Butch is just staring straight ahead, stoic, blank look on his face. But then he would get angry. He would yell things like, "I'm not crazy," which your whole defense is that you're crazy. So, dude, calm down. One of the jurors said that he would just stare at people and just stare. You know that kind of stare that some people can do where they look like they're looking through your entire soul? This juror said that he was doing that and that he came off as very, quote, Charles Manson-like. Butch and his entire defense team were never on the same page, and even the jury said that it was very confusing. They didn't seem to have just one story to be telling, and with the prosecution showing pictures, very graphic pictures of the children, of the parents, and what they looked like after they were murdered, the jury was starting to really be swayed to the side of the prosecution. So the defense lawyer, William Weber, he comes up with a different idea. So mid-trial, he's like, boom, we're going to switch. We're now going to say that Ronald Butch DeFeo did this in self-defense. William Weber claims the self-defense was because Ronald Butch Jr. had stolen $20,000 from the Briganti Buick auto shop, and he didn't want his father to find out because, as we all know, his father was intimidating, he was scary, and Butch knew that if his dad found out about this money, he's dead. So he's going to have to kill his dad first. But why did he have to kill his mom and his 4 siblings? So that theory just doesn't make sense. The jury is struggling to understand this story, and it seems like the defense team is struggling to even put together any kind of logical and cohesive story. What's that saying? They're bringing out all the stops on this one. But when Ronald DeFeo Jr. gets up on the stand under oath to testify, one of the jurors said that he acted sort of outraged, and he says it right under oath. He says, "Yes, I did it. I killed them all." If you are struggling to understand this story at all, do not worry about it. So am I. So was the jury. So was the judge. So was the prosecution. So are people still to this day. This case makes absolutely no sense. But you're going to get up on the stand and you're going to just say that you did it. This is what happens. On November 21st, 1975, Ronnie DeFeo Jr. was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years to life, and the judge actually did give him the possibility for parole. Of course, Butch becomes a huge celebrity in prison, as we do, regular old Ramirez, Dahmer, getting them fan letters. People were actually also buying his artwork. He was a painter, so he would paint pictures and sell them. I did hear another story, and it said that he was so popular at the time that some of the correctional guards, they would use his pass, like his little ID, to get in and out when he would have visitors and stuff, and they would keep it, and they would tell him, "Sorry, Ronnie, we lost your ID. You're gonna have to just go down and get a new one." But they were actually just like selling his IDs on eBay to make extra money. I mean, this is kind of a cool plan. By that time, Hollywood was already cashing in, still is to this day cashing in on that house. So some of those correctional officers getting some. Here is where it's going to start to get even weirder for you. So Butch does not keep his story straight, even as the years go by and he's still sitting in a jail cell. He's still coming up with some different theories as to what happened that night. And one of the craziest and weirdest is this. In 1986, Butch gives an interview to Newsday, and he claims that his sister Dawn killed their father. After she kills the father, the mother, Louise, then goes and kills all of her children with that rifle. Then Butch kills his mother. And the reason he didn't tell this story was because he didn't want his grandfather to have to hear that his daughter, Butch's mom, Louise, killed all of her children. But that wasn't to protect his grandfather's feelings or anything. He was not going to tell him that Louise killed the children because he thought his grandfather would act in rage and now kill Butch because Butch told him this story. Ronnie DeFeo Jr. really talks a lot for somebody who is saying absolutely nothing that makes sense. Now, in 1990, Butch is going to say that it was Dawn and an unknown assailant who he didn't get a good look at because the guy fled the house before Butch could get a look at him. Dawn and this unknown assailant killed the parents, and in retaliation, Butch killed Dawn by accident as they struggled over the rifle. Now, this guy's been sitting in jail for quite a while at this point, so you have to think, he's got all this time to come up with these stories, and he's got parole every now and then, so now it's like a new story every single time. In 2000, the year 2000, remember Conan? In the year 2000... Butch meets with an author named Rick Osuna. He is the author of the book The Night the DeFeos Died. And according to this author, they spoke for about 6 hours. Butch claims that Dawn, his sister, was sick and tired of the abuse at the hands of their parents, so she wanted to kill them. Butch claimed that Dawn was also a drug addict and that she one time even staged her own kidnapping for ransom money. Butch tells a story that he's in the basement and Dawn comes down to hang out with him. They are both upset, they are both high, and he says that they can hear his parents' voices upstairs conspiring to kill Butch. He hears his parents, or he hears voices upstairs talking about how they're going to kill him. This is when he starts to get into the "I heard voices, and the house told me to do it." What he says happened is that Dawn and two of her friends actually end up shooting everybody. He says that he left the house and that he drove around and he came back. And then when he gets back and he finds his whole family dead, he wrestles Dawn to the ground, takes the gun from her, and shoots her in the face in a rage. I know, it is a lot to unpack, and it is so confusing. Sadly, we may never know what actually happened to the 6 members of the DeFeo family that night, because in March 12th of 2021, Ronnie Butch DeFeo Jr. died at age 69 at the Albany Medical Center. There has never been a cause of death that has been released to the public. But wait, what is the Amityville horror about? On December 18th, 1975, George and Kathy Lutz would move in to 112 Ocean Ave with their 3 children. 28 days after residing in the home that was still filled with the DeFeo's furniture, George and Kathy Lutz would meet with lawyer William Weber, the defense attorney of Ronnie Butch DeFeo Jr., and what they would tell him would become a Hollywood franchise that would never end. 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The house that stood at that address would now become the main character in some of the greatest horror franchise movies of our time. Thank you so much for listening to Part 1, the Amityville House Murders on Residue. And join me again next week where we will be talking about the Lutz family. George and Kathy Lutz, the Amityville house, the Amityville horror. We will be discussing everything that happened after an adorable young family moved into the home that was the scene for one of the most horrid mass murders in all of Amityville history. Please consider leaving a 5-star review, or even just telling your friends about Residue, sharing Residue on any of your social media pages, or joining me on my social media pages. I am on Instagram as Residue Podcast. I am on Facebook as Residue, a true crime podcast. And I am on Spotify, Apple. Leave a 5-star review. That would be super cool. And that would make you super cool. No, I'm just kidding. Sound like an old lady. I adore all of you. Thank you so much for listening. And I cannot wait to see you again next week.